my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our third panel, Mohammed Abu-Nimer. Mohammed is a full professor in the International Peace and Conflict Resolution Program at American University and chair of this Saeed Abdulaziz for Peace and Conflict Resolution. He previously directed the Peace Building and Development Institute and is the co-founder and co-editor of the Journal of Peace Building and Development. With over 35 years of teaching experience, he has developed numerous courses and published widely in peace building, conflict resolution, and in faith-based approaches to peace education in the Arab and the Muslim world. As a scholar practitioner, he has led interreligious conflict resolution trainings and interfaith dialogue workshops in conflict zones worldwide, including Egypt, Northern Ireland, the Philippines, Israel, Palestine, Chad, Nigeria, and Sri Lanka. He has a lot of frequent flyer points. He has served as senior advisor for policy and research at the Center for Intercultural and Interreligious Dialogue in Vienna, Austria, and as a senior advisor to the KAICIID Dialogue, I don't know what the hell it means anyway, Center. He also is the founder of the Salam Institute for Peace and Justice. Professor Abu-Nimer has authored and edited more than 17 books and numerous peer-reviewed journal articles on faith-based peace building and intelligence, interfaith dialogue, and reconciliation. As I was reading this in fine print, with that much experience in conflict resolution, I don't know why we still have any problems. You should. Anyhow, with that, I'll turn it over to our capable moderator.
Thank you.
You put me out of business.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa, for your generous introduction. Our panel today is about resistance and repression, two concepts that come together usually. And I am not going to read the bio of the panelist. I asked Dr. Mustafa not to do that, but he insisted in torturing you with this. And I think you have the bios here in the booklet. Please look at them. We have Sereen Haddad, an activist, student, graduate, also well known in the campus resistance community and a frequent speaker in this area. Nora Barrows-Friedman will be virtually. Hopefully this will work, and we could listen to her, and the technology will help us. And she's a reporter and a broadcaster with more than 20 years experience. Last but not least is Mohammed, Mr. Mohammed Shah, and he is they didn't give me that. Attorney at law, author, and member of the District of Columbia Bar and the U.S. Supreme Court Bar. So we have a broadcast media journalist, reporter, the student activist, and communication also in her current job. And you have a professor of peace and conflict resolution who, as you heard, have solved all the conflict in the world, which is usually an accusation we get in our field of peace and conflict resolution. I'll be talking first. Each one of us will talk about 15 minutes, hopefully, and then we'll leave about half an hour for discussion and for questions and comments as well. That is the plan. My presentation is really an introduction to Sereen's work and activism. I'll be giving just a general observations and notes about the nature of resistance and the nature of repression, as you heard a little bit from Ian Lustig in the previous in the previous panel, a couple of comments on that. And I'll be showing some also. I hope it's going to work. Yes. So by May 24th, the student leadership led by Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, Jewish, Black, and Latinx have really kept not only the country, but also globally, people on their toes and people looking for their activities inspired by it. A Student for Justice for Palestine, Jewish Voices for Peace, JVP, and Not in Our Name, as well as number of organizations who emerged and other also existed. There will have been many campuses, I'll see in a few minutes, but I'll be focusing on some of the major Ivy League programs, which I think had lots of coverage as well. And I think they have also their weight in the field of both Israel-Palestine international relation and US foreign policy. International students and those from low-income families faced higher risk in this campaign and in this both as a target, but also participated in. And faculty and staff also were also engaged in this part. Okay, I'm getting there. And again, the Harvard University Cambridge Law. I'm going to talk about some of the achievements that have taken place. And the Divinity School passed resolution calling for divestment. Undergraduate Association approved as a referendum on divestment. And those are unheard of prior to this campaign. Rutgers University in New Jersey, the faculty AAUP, as you heard before, passed a resolution endorsing divestment from Israeli institution. The Princeton also dozen professors signed an open letter supporting Columbia students, so they joined the campaign. And the media coverage was really, really widely. Jazeera English, Jazeera also, if you watched that, had live from many of those protests and encampment. And even city government, Portland, Maine, Philadelphia City Council adopted resolution aligned with the poster demand. And those also were in connection and during the same context when the student movement was really working and participating in these parts. Let me just go back a little bit and get the I'm working on it is 140 campuses, so that's not a small number. And this was unheard of prior to October 23. You had the 45 states in the US have movement and have campuses who really had the protest on them. About 3,000 students were arrested in the spring of 24 alone. A huge number, making one of the largest campus protest wave in recent US history. Again, according to this armed conflict location and event, they mentioned 1,300 protest events that took place, and 94% pro-Palestinian, and they said 97% of them were peaceful, and I couldn't find information about the 3% that were not peaceful and how did they define unpeaceful. That remained to be sort of explored. 12% participated in a pro-Palestinian protest. Out of the campuses, 12% out of the students, that's very significant number. Very few causes could mobilize a 12% in that context. But also, surprisingly, there was 7% in counter protest, and 45% supported the protester. 31% were Muslim as well, and also 20% of them declared themselves as sort of liberal or secular, not committed religiously to these aspects. I think I mentioned that, as well as I mentioned this one in terms of their achievements. The movement really won on campus, and despite the suppression, students achieved notable policy shifts and symbolic wins. I'm saying symbolic because, again, many of the peace movement and protest movement, not in this context, but generally, very hard to capture quantitatively or qualitatively concrete achievement. Student movement do not necessarily bring regime down in most of the cases, or they don't necessarily solve conflict. They are contributing factor to many other movements and other group as well. But symbolically, to bring the BDS issue on campuses is very important, and the divestment to gain such attraction in such universities is very impressive as well. And having the faculty and also student government, even at AU, where I teach here, our student issued a resolution in the undergraduate level in support of the BDS, which is unheard of. And I've been at this university for over 28 years. We've never had even such imagination that our students group will move into that direction. Again, in University of Washington, they agreed to re-examine its financial partnership, and the national local group, I mentioned them earlier, engaged, publicly supported the student process. And you saw the images of the encampment as well. To what extent the university resisted and repressed. Those were, as I said, some concrete achievement, and some of them are symbolic. For me, when I look at this, really, the contribution is to the discourse and the narrative, the public one, globally and locally. That's very important, not really to undermine its value in the global movement. The universities were caught into surprise, and the U.S. universities escalated their response against the pro-Palestine movement with disciplinary measures, including suspension, expulsion, and even revoking degrees. And you'll hear the story, I hope, from Sereen as well. Speech codes were revised to criminalize tents, megaphone, flags, face covering, and posters. They were trying to be very creative in suppressing the movement, and I think the louder it become, the more stress and the more repressive they try to do. And you see the list of the Ivy schools also engaging in such campaign. If we look at the key example of suppression, you can see the list here. To prohibit 30 or to put 30 in terms of laws, students from campus, unless they pledge not to protest. They had some students to sign, and they circulated as required, obliging students to sign those minutes as illegal. Even this is something never happened in the U.S. campuses, and also I think in many other campuses around the world. This was unheard of. Colombia expelled the students, and the case of Mahmoud Khalil and other, and also threatened to revoke the alumni diploma that people have. Michigan revised the code to ban encampment and allow administrator to file conduct complaint directly. And the UCLA also banned the chalk flag and sound equipment, which my university also learned the trick, and banned our student protest from using megaphone, and even at some point they banned the work of Student for Justice Palestine here in town, and until now they're still in that situation. Again, the university suppression continues with the law school in NYU. Surveillance intensify, and the students were barred from using, as I said, amplified sound and even Palestinian flag. I have students in my class here in DC who actually was waving a flag on a very small stick, plastic stick, in the inauguration of our president. And they attacked her, and they arrested her, and they suspended her from one semester out of the school. And the DC police department accused her of threatened to murder them. And her case is still pending, and the court is still actually postponed, and I think toward the end of this month we'll be looking into that. So unbelievable surveillance through security firms, and police also were deployed. This will not happen without the coverage of the US government. And it's important to look at the macro. This was on the micro and micro meso level on the universities. There was a coverage by the government, there was coverage by the national policies, and our president, as you know, very quick in signing executive orders. And he did not, so this one and also the previous one, they really expanded the, executive order expand enforcement with agency to instruct penalize supporters of terrorism. Mentioning Hamas in any form was so threatening to many of our students and to many students, and it was a liability even to speak about, to say that type of conversation. And in the previous panel also spoke about the IHR definition of anti-Semitism that got elastically stretched in a way to include every solidarity for Palestine. Even the word intifada, I had to debate in campuses whether it is an incitement to violence, with many people who did not know even what intifada mean. In addition to the $430 million that were extracted or taken from Columbia, Harvard as well for the same thing, and the visas of international students. This semester I had 9 students who did not get visas by the beginning of the semester. The campaign continued, and those were mainly from Muslim countries. So the ban on Muslim countries continue de facto without necessarily the big sort of campaign, public campaign that took place in the first administration. The ICE arrested several students, and as I said, you saw Mahmoud Khalil case as well. So federally, there were federal, directives, and the DOJ is involved, and the Interagency of Anti-Semitism Task Force. You see that the system here is in place, and that's where many of the university administrators and university security forces derive their legitimacy in many ways. Why this is happening? This was 23 and 24, and also early 25. The pro-Israeli Zionist agency have mobilized during the summer of 24, and they really felt on the defensive, and they put their campaign about $9 million Israeli Hasbara put in the US alone in the Israeli Hasbara agency, really targeting campuses and also universities. But terrorizing and silencing continues, and it has a major, maybe one of the international students were the most affected by this as well. And the congressional hearing, you saw how the Harvard and the MIT and UPenn were cornered publicly. Even if they were not guilty, that putting them on the spot at that point and in that way had a huge effect on faculty, on the students, and on staff to engage in this part. So the campaign is serious and was really combined with this anti-BDS aspect. The Israeli campaign, the Israel pro-Israel campaign, is about narrative framing, reframing, and political pressure by lobbying university board of trustees, and that's where most of the challenges are. The board of trustees, as my colleague previously mentioned here, the faculty and the staff may be in one side, but the board and the administrator are most likely on the other side, and that's where the power is, and that's where the money resources are also there. I mentioned many of the administrative techniques that were used, and legal pressure, lawsuit against the students and against faculty. I've met many faculty who actually, especially those who are not tenure track or permanent position, who were actually expelled, and they were not invited to teach again. This is not only Palestine. Those things the US did not invent. Every dictatorship around the world have used them. Many of the repressive regime have used these techniques. So for many of us who work in conflict area, we're familiar with that, and also against anti-Vietnam War and anti-apartheid movement also in South Africa for at least 11 years between 79 and all. Where are we now? This may be a taste of reality. I was talking in the hallway to a couple of students or young people, I think they're students, and one of them said, yeah, I feel it's been affected. And in my university and many other campuses, you don't see as much as a protest anymore. You don't see as much as encampment, and people are really fearful. And this is because of end of academic year, starting a new semester. We always can blame that, but also the administrative crackdown. Students are afraid sometimes to talk in the class where the professor, they don't trust the professor. There's also the activism fatigue. It's very hard to maintain that for a long time. And there is the fragmentation. The groups, they're not necessarily unified. They're working on that. And of course, our political climate with our current president and the federal agency and the Congress and the media have moved on. Our media and the global media have moved on from that. And I think the ceasefire also gave people an exit for many people to say, okay, it's almost solved, there's not much killing, there is no more genocide, there is no sense of urgency as it used to be, except among those of us who continue to follow the news in Gaza and the West Bank. But it's, I wouldn't say it's sleep or it's already, the movement died. I think there'll be exaggeration, but it's not as it was before. There are more also activities that has been taking place, but they're not getting the same coverage as it was. The infrastructure and institution of the movement continue to be there. Faculty and the staff network continue to be there on campuses, and some of them are hesitant to mobilize these days as well. There is strong diverse group of students organization, not only for Palestine, anti-racism, sexual orientation, solidarity with Native American, you name it, environmental, you name so many diverse groups that exist, and they themselves also in support for Palestinian and for the solidarity with Palestine. So the channels still existing to socialize incoming students, the freshmen who are coming now into the university, they will be stepping in the ground very different from 3 years ago. They'll be more politicized. There are more possibility to socialize them into the solidarity movement. Maybe 2-3 lessons from the apartheid in South Africa, as well as the anti-Vietnam War. We know that those movements do not end war by themselves, but they are an important piece of the system, the web of resistance. And also it's important to think of what does the Palestinian leadership is doing in terms of linking to this, because they should have a role into this. And the role is really regarding how do you sustain the coalition with racial justice, indigenous group as well, and network, even the interfaith coalitions. How do you maintain sustainability and spontaneity in the movement and not to allow it to fade away? And how can we continue to build in the narrative of resistance similar to the anti-apartheid success that took place before? And what's the most missing right now, I think, is the global coordination. The anti-apartheid movement in South Africa had a huge infrastructure of coordination. The movement for Palestine is globally not as organized as it is, but I think that's something I think we're going to see more into it, and to invest in the storytelling, in the culture, and the digital advocacy to use that, and to provide a moral and political clarity to youth, because that moral clarity and political clarity are missing if faculty and the Palestinian political leader do not speak to that audience particularly. There are Palestinian NGOs and Palestinian think tank centers like this one and other, and student network, and all of those are in need to have a network for coordination, to have a global strategy to sustain that work. So it's not totally lost cause in terms of reviving this in the next semester, but I think we are in a different position than it was beginning of this year, with some major symbolic accomplishment and also some concrete aspects. Thank you. And I think beside this general introduction, Sereen can take us into more specific case. Sereen.
Shukran. My name is Sereen Haddad. Thank you guys also for staying today. I know it's been a long day and hearing people just spew words at you. But this is all necessary. You know, education is necessary for us to continue to move forward in a movement. There's a reason it's called a movement. So I think with that, I want to thank you all for being here today. I also want to thank the Jerusalem Fund for creating a space for us to say things that the world tries very hard to silence. I was an intern here at the Jerusalem Fund over the summer, actually. And they were very supportive, actually, while I was going through some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in my presentation. So I'm Palestinian. People typically will categorize me as like a student organizer. And I went to Virginia Commonwealth University. And before anything else that I would say, before any title or any degree, I think the most important thing is that I like to categorize myself as a granddaughter from the people who refused to disappear, and a descendant from Palestine. My teta is actually here today, Hanan Faiz, and I know my Sida would have loved to be here today. His name is Jamil Faiz, if any of you all know him, but he is at home. So as a Palestinian and people who have endured dispossession and displacement and genocide, I come to this work knowing that our persistence in itself is resistance and our existence in itself is resistance as well. I come here as someone who has lost over 250 family members in this ongoing genocide. My dad is from Gaza and my mom is from Nablus. And of course, something I feel that gets very lost all the time is that they weren't just numbers. You know, I mean, we see the death toll creeping up. And I think at this point, unfortunately, whether we accept it or not, we've become a little desensitized to it. And we need to stay sensitized. I mean, these were real people. I mean, everyone in this room right now, I can't even actually eye-wise estimate, but I'm going to say maybe 100 or so. There's been over 600,000 killed. And that's not even, we don't even know if that's a complete accurate number. It could be more. There's many missing underneath the rubble. So I hope that we just continue to ground ourselves with that and recognize that and understand that. I think one of the murders that hit me the hardest was one of my distant cousins, Abdullah Al-Farra, who was in Gaza, and my family's from Khan Yunis. And in July of 2024, he was getting bread for his family, and he walked outside of the house to go get bread, and he was killed by a bomb. And so from our family group chat, we open it up, and it's a picture of him and his lifeless body on the ground. And next to it, next to the piles of blood, you can see bread. He was bringing the bread home for his family. And so I think something that we need to also remember is the Palestinians, although we have just seen a world that has just consistently shown us horrors and bombing and displacement, we remain a people of love and of care and putting family first, putting each other first. And that's also why everyone is here in this room. So I do want to acknowledge that. So of course, I can't really separate my activism from the grief that I've endured, that we've all endured, but neither can I separate it from the love that does fuel me to continue to do this work. Love for my family and for my people and for humanity itself. I know there's many days that I still wake up and feel like this can't be a reality. And there's nights that I feel like I can't sleep because I feel like I can still hear voices from Gaza echoing out. And so every time I do speak about Gaza, I feel like I'm trying to breathe life back into it. And so we do speak. And that's what we're going to be speaking about today. So they tell you, I think one of the biggest jokes ever is they tell you that the United States is a free country and that universities are supposed to be places of academic freedom and the right to express yourself and that you can speak your truth. And this is something that as I was entering into university, I tried to believe and I wanted to believe. And Virginia Commonwealth University, if you all aren't aware of it, it's in Richmond, Virginia. And their tagline is uncommon. That's the wording that they use. You'll really quickly realize after this presentation how ironic it is. They use diversity as a PR tool and a buzzword. And my mom actually originally pushed me to go there because she thought that as a Palestinian, I would be welcome somewhere, one would think, at a place that, preaches diversity. And I quickly realized that clearly was not the case. So we've heard these stories a million times, and so I won't go too much into detail, but I, of course, have lived the consequences of speaking truth to power. And last year at the encampment that I had helped organize, I was hospitalized simply for being at the encampment and being in solidarity with those in Palestine. And this year as well, my university withheld my degree for months because I refused to stay silent. So of course, these experiences were very painful, but they also strengthened my conviction in the fact that speaking out for justice is always worth the risk. It always is. And I wish that, after all this, I wish I could say I was kidding, but in the process of trying to get my degree back, VCU had offered me, when they gave me my sanctions and my punishments, and again, I won't go too much into detail, but they withheld my degree for saying that I allegedly violated a university policy that didn't even exist. Within that day, we were standing there in the year kind of mark of the encampment. It was April 29, 2025, that we had a couple students. We all were sitting on the lawn and doing finals work. We weren't intense. We were not that that's a crime either, but we were sitting down doing our finals work, and one by one administration starts to come up to us and telling us that we're violating university policies. And when we tried to push and ask, what policies are we violating exactly? I mean, we saw what happened last year where people got pepper sprayed and brutalized. And so we're trying to understand how to protect the students. And so I tell the university administrator that, what policies are we violating? So I can understand, so we can work to protect the students. And his response was, I'm working to protect myself. And he walks away. And so that to me is what I felt like summarized being Palestinian at a university, at an institution, is to be looked at as a threat simply for existing. A week or so later, after that day, where they just continued to send police onto that lawn, even though students were just studying, they ended up arresting a student. When I started chanting with some of my friends, a policeman had come up to me and told me that if you continue chanting, I'm going to have you arrested. And VCU has something that is called the free speech zone, which is, I have no words, actually. There's a free speech zone at VCU. They call it, it's a Park Plaza amphitheater, and they title it the free speech zone. And so the issue that they told us was that we were there and it seemed like a political gathering that was going on. And if we wanted it to exist, we needed to move to the free speech zone. And that in itself, it doesn't make sense. Someone had brought up that, if someone's wearing a Malcolm X t-shirt and someone doesn't agree with Malcolm X's views, does that then mean that person has to walk to the go free speech zone because they're being too political? None of this makes sense. I mean, these policies, they're not black and white for a reason. It's that way they can select who they target and who they repress. So in the process of trying to get back my degree, which they sent the notification to me 3 days before I was set to walk, graduation, and I finished my 4-year degree in 3 years, but that means nothing to VCU. So they said, regardless of all the different accomplishments, you allegedly violated university policy, so they sent me a notification saying my degree was going to be withheld. They didn't really give an explanation besides from that. I was allowed to walk at graduation, but I wasn't going to be given a degree, and they told me I was going to have to go through a disciplinary process. And I wish I could say I was kidding, but within that disciplinary process, once they still found me responsible after my first hearing, they told me my sanctions were disciplinary probation, which I didn't even attend the school at this point, so I'm not really sure what that meant. But the second one was they told me that I could take a step towards getting my degree if I took a class on morals and ethics. Nothing else to add there. I declined their offer and decided to appeal the withholding again. And despite the fact that during the pendency of the appeal, there were over 10,000 signatures, 12,000 signatures for an action letter, despite the fact that the case made international news and Amy Goodman welcomed us on Democracy Now! There was pressure from senators and delegates meeting with the president of the university urging them to release my degree. They still did not. So VCU had every single opportunity to release the degree, and they still did not. So on July 22nd, I took it to the hearing in the higher institutional court. It presented my evidence during the hearing, and then 1 week later, I had learned that I won my appeal, and VCU had no choice but to release my degree. So I come to this work as a student and as part of a generation that refuses to stay silent. We're building movements on campuses and in our communities that really insist on showing the truth and telling the truth, even when institutions try very hard to erase it. And we're talking about repression, so let's talk about it. And people ask me all the time, isn't it dangerous You may not get a job. Don't you worry about your future. It's going to affect your career. But a future built on silence is not a future I want and not a future anyone should want. A career that requires me to betray my people is not success, and it's surrender. And I just want to call it out for what it is. So every time that I do organize and every time that I do speak and every time I stand, in front of people like this, I try to remind myself of the children of Gaza who will never grow up, those whose lives were taken. And I remind myself that they would give anything to stand where we are today, right now. I remind myself that resistance is a responsibility. It's a moral, political, and historical responsibility. And if I had to choose again, and if I knew from the very beginning of entering my university that my degree would be withheld, and even if they told me I wouldn't get it back, I would still do it all over again. Because Gaza and Palestine are worth every single risk, and we need to remember that. I would still do it. People often call this work, they associate repression, in combating repression with courage. And I just want to talk about that word for a second. Because I remember about 1.5 years ago, I tried to enter back into Palestine, and I've gone, thankfully, about 5 times or so. We used to go every 2 years when I was younger, and visit Ramallah, visit El Bira, Nablus, just all around. And I tried to go back last year, and my mom wasn't going with me, and so she sat me down and she told me, listen, there may be a possibility that they deny you, so I want you to be prepared for that. And I think in that moment, although that possibility had floated around in my brain, I had to sit with that for a second because, imagine being warned not by a stranger, but by your own mother that you might be refused entry into a place where your grandparents were born, and where your roots are buried, and into the soil that holds the bones of your ancestors. And so she told me, they're afraid of you because you do speak the truth. They're afraid of people that do speak the truth. That is their biggest fear. And if there's one thing that oppressors do fear, it is the truth, because we carry these stories etched into the earth centuries before they even ever claimed it was theirs. And the last thing she told me is she said, if they do deny you, cry if you need to, but do it later in your room. Do not do it in front of them. She said that's exactly what they want you to do. They want to see that they defeated you. It's psychological warfare. So my mother raised me to understand something essential, is that we are human beings with emotions, and it's natural to break underneath the weight that we do carry. But she also taught me that breaking is not the same thing as surrendering. Even when tears come, they should never be mistaken for defeat. She raised me to never bow to injustice. My mom was a lawyer, and she actually is the first Arab judge in Virginia. So she's a Palestinian judge. And so I've always looked up to her. And so, she's always raised me to never bow down to injustice and to understand that silence helps the oppressor. That's what they want. And that privilege must be used for those who do not have it, or who have less of it, and that my voice is not just mine, but it belongs to everyone who cannot speak freely, those who have been buried underneath the rubble, who have been stopped at checkpoints and silenced by borders and walls. So the journey to the Palestinian border took me about 5 hours or so. I was entering from the bridge, from Malik Hussein crossing, Sheikh Hussein crossing, and they held me there for 6 to 7 hours in questioning. And waiting on me on the other side were my friends and my family, of course, that were going to welcome me with open arms, and I'm sure a lot of matluba. But I ended up getting denied. They denied me, and the reason that they cited was public security and safety threat. This was 1.5 years ago, so I was 19 years old. So, 19-year-old is apparently the biggest threat to security and safety. So I went back 2 days later, and mind you, this is while the visa waiver program was active. This has already been a thing. So the visa, I'm a United States citizen. I don't have any other citizenships. So the way that they justified denying me was putting it down as public security and safety threat. I tried again 3 days later at another bridge, and they denied me again. But I didn't cry in front of them, no matter how much they waved my passport in front of me and taunted me. The soldiers, were speaking in Hebrew. They were laughing at me. I could tell what they were doing. I at one point wanted water. They refused to give it to me. I tried to go to the restroom, and they told me that I had to leave all of my belongings, and so I refused to go to the restroom. I just sat down. I got back onto the bus with my head high, even though the Israeli soldier, I kid you not, was going like this with my passport while I was trying to get it. I just looked at him. I took my passport. I got back onto the bus, and as soon as I left their sight, I did cry, and that's okay. So with my mom's voice in my head, I picked myself up, and the time that I was supposed to spend in Palestine, I ended up spending in Jordan, in a refugee camp, Al-Ba'a refugee camp. And I stayed there and devoted my time to help refugees and kids there, and I did some trauma-informed care with them. I painted with them, and I ended up changing my flight back a couple days early to head back to the United States to make it just in time for a protest when Netanyahu was coming to visit. That really just had a lot of rage built up, even more than ever. So I guess it all goes to say that the word courage is not about being unbreakable. It's choosing to rise even when you have been broken again and again, and when the world has shown you again and again that you should be broken. So courage is not the absence of fear, but it's what you do with that fear. Courage is when students will face down police on their campuses because they believe in freedom, and when refugees rebuild their lives from nothing, and when parents teach their children to dream in a world that tries to deny them a future. The student movement, like you mentioned, is part of a very long legacy, from the Black freedom struggle to indigenous sovereignty. Fighting for Palestine is part of the same fight for every oppressed child, from Gaza to Ferguson, Sudan, and the Congo, Tigray, all these different genocides that aren't as talked about. So Palestine is a mirror that reflects the larger question. Will we choose humanity or will we choose domination? Change in general, combating repression, creating change, has never ever come from following the status quo. It's never come from silence or from obedience or from protecting systems that profit off of our suffering. Change comes when people are willing to disrupt and are willing to risk and refuse to go along with injustice simply just because it is easier. So at VCU, although they'll try to convince you otherwise, I've seen how institutions will cling to the status quo, punishing students, hiding behind policies, creating very gray policies, selective enforcement, pretending neutrality while backing systems of war. I've also seen how Palestinians are denied their most basic rights and humanity and freedom. So neutrality in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It is siding with the oppressor. And so we need to stop pretending that these institutions in themselves are neutral spaces, because they're not. They're not. Repression is rising everywhere. Students are continuously being arrested and surveilled and blacklisted. There's faculty that's being fired. Scholars are being censored, and social media and Meta are cracking, down hard more than ever right now. And that's because repression is often looked at as something that people in power use, but something that we can't mistake is that repression is not a tool of the strong, it's a tool of the weak. The only reason they repress and oppress us is because they are scared of the truth coming out, because the truth to them is dangerous, and when they see solidarity, it's contagious. And our movement is working, and that's why they're scared, and people in power are terrified of a generation that refuses to inherit their apathy. Something that I wrote in the end of one of my papers that VCU made me write after I got another policy violation. They actually wrote and told me after I had placed, you mentioned tiny flags, Palestinian flags. Something that me and a couple of my friends had done was we chalked on the university campus, which actually, according to VCU, is the biggest threat in the world right now, is sidewalk chalk, because they ended up banning sidewalk chalk after the SJP used to sidewalk chalk on the university campus every Wednesday. They gave me a policy violation after we chalked on the sidewalk and after we placed Palestinian flags into the lawn. So they told me I needed to write a paper about decision-making, what I would do better in my decisions. And the first thing that I said is I wouldn't have come to VCU. And then at the end, I said, history won't remember the administrators or the occupiers who tried to silence us, but the students, workers, and voices that refuse to be silenced, because humanity will prevail, oppressors fall, empires collapse, but truth endures, and those who dare to speak it, whether against repression here on our campuses or against occupation abroad, will be remembered long after those who tried to silence them are forgotten. My Teta carries Palestine in everything that she does, and she's shown me that history lives in our daily lives and the love that we do pass on to the next generation. And my Sido is Palestinian. He's from a town called Jet, and he wrote a book documenting the villages of 1948 to ensure that our history could never be erased, so that even if the world turns its back on us, our names, our homes, and our stories would never be forgotten, and we would remain alive. I, as a little kid, and even now, often dreamed of my grandparents returning to Palestine and walking beside them through the streets of Jet, and seeing their faces light up as they stand from the soil they were torn from. And I dream of that moment when their exile ends, and I'm with them not as a visitor denied entry, not as a child of displacement, but as a family returning home together. Today, my Sido is bedridden, and his memory is fading, and that's why he's not here today. And so he may not remember all the details anymore, but he is living proof of something much greater. That even when the body weakens, the spirit of Palestine will never fade. Because even when I always say this, even when I walk into the room and I'm wearing a kufiyya, he won't say anything, but he'll look at me and he's like, that's all he'll do. Yeah. So my grandparents' life's work was to preserve history, and my life's work is to make sure our future is freedom. Everything I do is because of them and the generations before me and the generations to come after me. And they taught me that to be Palestinian is not just to survive, but to insist on life and joy and justice. So when I imagine liberation, I don't imagine geopolitics. I imagine my cousins running down the beach in Gaza without drones over their heads. I imagine fishing with my father on the seas. I imagine rebuilding the homes that my family lost. And I imagine being able to visit my own country without being interrogated or denied or detained or turned away. I imagine walking through the streets of Palestine without fear, and I imagine return not as a metaphor, but as a reality. And every action that we do take here does bring that future closer, even when it does feel small, and even when it does feel slow, and even when the repression does get heavier. Every generation of Palestinians has been told to give up, and every single generation of Palestinians has refused to do so. I often think back to Ahmed Manasra, who, if you all are not aware, is a 13-year-old child from the West Bank who was imprisoned for 10 years unlawfully because he had a rock in his hand. And so it shows you, it brings up the question, why is a multi-billion-dollar backed army afraid of a 13-year-old child with a rock in its hand? And it's because that rock carries more than just a rock. It's truth and it's remembrance. And it's the fact that a 13-year-old boy looked at these people that are his oppressors and said, I refuse to stay silent about this. And I refuse to just let this happen to me. So that rock terrified soldiers in a tank, and they imprisoned him for 10 years. That in itself is a form of resistance. And so every single act of resistance, every single voice that refuses to stay silent is a seed that will grow into liberation. And so I kind of want to reel it back in and close off by talking about being Palestinian is often means viewed differently, and as if our identities are defined by the conflicts that we do endure. But if there's one thing that I do think speaks the most about who I am, it's that although Palestinians have been faced with a world that has shown us horror and displacement and bombings, we remain a people of love and peace, like I said so before. And I think peace is not the absence of conflict, but it is where people are not defined by the violence they have endured, but by the futures they are free to create. Everything's interconnected, like you talked about. We can't talk about Palestine while ignoring Sudan and Congo and Tigray. I encourage every single scholar, every single student, every single community member to speak up. You all have a role in this. There's even, how many of you all are invested in the Virginia retirement system, like your pension plans? Anyone? Some people. The Virginia retirement system actually is invested in 14 different companies that profit off the genocide of the Palestinian people. So this is something you can talk about, for example. There's many ways to get involved. So I think that we honor our martyrs and our living by refusing to get comfortable. Comfort, I think, in itself is the enemy of justice, and every single victory is just the beginning, and every single step forward is a reminder that we can and must take another. And we owe it to our people to never settle for less, to never settle for the world that the way it is, but to fight for the world that they deserved and do deserve, and that we can always do more, and as long as our siblings are able to breathe, we will. And in the words of my great uncle, Bassam Shakha, who was the mayor of Nablus, and who had an assassination attempt on him. The IOF placed bombs on his car because he refused to stay silent about the oppression that our people were facing. The bomb went off and he survived, but both of his legs had to get amputated. So in the words of my great uncle, he said, which what that means is they can try to cut off my legs, but they will never cut off my struggle. We come from a people who taught the world that steadfastness is not just a strategy, but it is a way of life. And as Fred Hampton said, if you dare to struggle, you dare to win. And if you do not dare to struggle, then you do not deserve to win. So I stand here today because I choose struggle, and I choose my people in general, and I know we all do, and I choose liberation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sereen, for your inspirational resistance and really reflecting the concept of sumud and its really magnificent way. Thank you also for sharing your own personal story. We will move to our third speaker or the third presentation, Mr. Mohammed Shah. Do we have Nora available? Okay, so is it okay if I go with Nora? Thank you. So we have third speaker, Nora Barrows-Friedman, who's a reporter and broadcaster more than 20 years. Nora, the floor is yours, and you can share with us your insight on these topics. Thank you. You have about 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Amazing. I just want to say it's such an honor to be part of this panel and to be invited by the Jerusalem Fund. So I just want to say thank you. And on behalf of all of us at the Electronic Intifada, it's just a great honor to be part of this, and an honor really for me to be part of the documentary wing of the movement, to be able to track the just the extraordinary work of students like Sereen, and so many who have literally put their bodies on the line in order to try and shake the foundations of this country and of the values that that it has constructed in terms of protecting, coddling, and covering for a genocide. Israel is part of U.S. empire and part of the kind of broader Western imperialist project in West Asia. And students, I think, have been at the forefront of making the connections between, political struggles and connecting these movements of liberation and struggle. Palestine has always been at the center of resistance against empire and settler colonialism and racism and theft of resources. And it is because of the student movement, especially in the last 2 years during this genocide, that the whole world has really become more motivated and has become more informed. And I just have immeasurable respect and gratitude for the students who have done this work and continue and are not backing down in the face of this kind of repression. When I think about what the student movement looks like now, and not just students, but activism in general, and organizers who are not, fading away into the darkness just because there's a so-called ceasefire, which is not really a ceasefire because Israel has never honored any contract or treaty or any sort of agreement ever. It's I think of I just think of the incredible amount of resources that we have now that are here to protect this movement, that are here to amplify these voices, who I think, now that things are so ramped up, I know that civil rights organizations and, groups of attorneys like Palestine Legal and the Center for Constitutional Rights and the ACLU are doubling down on their efforts to protect students' right to free speech and right to organize, and to remind universities that they are not hedge funds for the rich and the powerful. They are centers of educational instruction. And I think students have also, really kind of reorganized their relationship to universities and places of higher education, where kind of the veneer has been stripped, especially over the last 2 years, but in the last few decades, where, repression has been steadily increasing to a degree that is somewhat unprecedented. I mean, there was repression in the 1940s against people organizing against the rise of fascism and the West's relationship to it. Again in the 1960s during the anti-Vietnam War era, and in the 1980s, in terms of resisting South African apartheid and the US's an institutional relationship there. And I think that the level of repression is so naked now. I mean, what Sereen was talking about, how, these like so-called, student policies or campus policies are just kind of made up on the fly. And they have teams of lawyers not to protect the students who are paying tuition and are being intimidated by the cops or campus security, but to protect their own investments and to protect their own ambition, as the dean of students or as a chancellor, as a president of a university. I think that students are seeing now more clearly than ever the role that educational institutions are playing versus the role that they can play. And just as these outside, legal protection organizations are doubling down on their efforts to protect students and the right to free speech and academic freedom, I think students are also themselves doubling down and saying, if we're going to be intimidated and repressed for, holding a Palestinian flag, a tiny Palestinian flag, then we might as well go all the way and keep demanding divestment and keep getting in the way of the administration that wants to silence and repress and appease, a pro-apartheid, pro-fascism, pro-genocide federal administration. And so I feel like students are going into this, this third, I can't believe it's 3 years of genocide. This is the third year of genocide, with their eyes open, with their sleeves rolled up, and with so much political clarity and principle behind them. And I think, for me and my colleagues as members of independent media, who have been tracking the student movement for so long, and have been, I feel like we've been in collaboration and connection with student movements for decades. I think it's also up to us in independent media to continue to amplify the voices of students, to continue to demand that their demands are listened to and that they don't feel like they're fighting this alone. And, I mean, who knows what's going to come down the pike from the Trump administration, or from the Democrats for that matter. And in this, really delicate, fragile, and anxious period in Gaza itself, I'm just struck. I mean, yesterday I was, just scrolling through Instagram, and there were photos and videos, one after the other, of students who have gone through hell for 2 years, Tawjihi students across Gaza who were celebrating with their families after finding out their results. And, we owe it to those students in Gaza. We owe it, as Sereen said, to the martyrs and those who are living, to keep fighting to not back down in the face of repression, to keep supporting each other and building this community, and staying true to our principles. This is a really difficult time for so many, on top of, 2 years of the most horrific images and experiences that our loved ones have gone through. And now is the time really to consolidate our communities and to grow them, and support the students who are once again at the vanguard of really speaking truth to power and of holding these centers of power accountable, on campus and around the world. So I just, I just wanted to say thank you to Sereen, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nora, for again emphasizing on the resistance aspect and amplifying the voices as students, also the consolidation of the community, much needed right now, just to continue and feed in that discourse, and also specifically supporting students on campuses that you highlighted. Well, thank you again. We'll move now to our last speaker, Mr. Mohammed Shah, attorney at law and author and member of the Columbia Bar as well. Mr. Mohammed, the floor is yours. You have about 15 minutes. Oh, you want to speak from the podium? You okay?
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. When my father lay dying, he was a great dervish, and I asked him that, what is your parting advice? He said only one word: speak kalma-i-haq.
كلمة الحق.
And today I salute the Jerusalem Fund for hosting this event at this particular juncture. And I salute this young lady, Sereen. I salute you. And I salute the gray-haired people here, some who can hardly walk, who have walkers, who have health problems, but the flame burns bright in them. I wish more young people should see them, that the cause is just, because the Palestinian cause is a cause of humanity, cause of human decency, and a litmus test of conscience. When I was in Canterbury with my wife, Dana, I was staying within the precincts of the Canterbury Cathedral, the Mecca of the Church of England, of the Episcopal Church. And I wanted to see the spot where Sir Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was killed, assassinated at the behest of Henry II. And I went to the spot. Nobody talks of Henry II. People talk of Sir Thomas Becket. Then across, it's a very great lesson for Palestine. Across the channel is France, totally different culture. There was tremendous repression, abuse, humiliation, insult by the aristocracy, by the elites, treating the peasants like dirt, thinking they are immune, they are impregnable, and they are absolutely exempt from the process of nature. Yet, when push comes to shove, when people are pushed to the breaking point, what happened? They rose up and they stormed the Bastille. July 14, 1789, it is being celebrated. And Sereen, you remind me of one of my heroines in modern life, Nora Khan. Nora Khan was a direct descendant of one of the greatest freedom fighters, Tipu Sultan, who died fighting the British Muslim ruler in 1799. his direct descendant, Noor Inayat Khan, during World War II, she volunteered to go to occupied France when it was under Germany to resist Nazi occupation. Because she's a Muslim, she is of that background, her issue is not highlighted. She was captured, betrayed by the French, taken to Dachau, where Dana and I, my wife and I, she was of German background, we went to her ancestral place, we went there, and there was a death camp, 40 minutes from Munich, and in the small town of Dachau. The only person who has been honored with 2 plaques is Noor Inayat Khan. One inside the Dachau death camp, one outside. She never quit, she never surrendered, she never capitulated. And about 10 years ago in England, Princess Anne, the daughter of Queen Elizabeth, unveiled a statue of her. So that's what endures. You have to see basically what endures. I had the privilege, my wife and I had the privilege of spending an entire day with Muhammad Ali, my hero, Deer Lake, Pennsylvania, when he was trying to be the first man to get the heavyweight boxing champion for the 3rd time. And we had a long chat. And he said something very prophetic. He said, when I am gone, you will not know who's the heavyweight champion of the world. And lucky are those who fought against me, because they'll be remembered. And he was right, basically. Just a few months ago, my wife Dana told me that George Foreman has died because he fought against Ali. And today, who endures? Unfortunately, the black community didn't embrace him. Even Martin Luther King didn't embrace him. Even some of the black fighters didn't call him Ali, they called him Clay. He had to fight for that. Never forget the power of the one. People say, what can we do? Because we like to look, when you see the arc of life, you see things not happening in your lifetime, you think it will never happen. But that is false. That's misleading. It's a mistake to see that. One woman, girl of younger than you, Darnella Fraser. This guy, George Floyd, March 25, Memorial Day, he was being suffocated to death by 4 policemen. She went out and she captured it on video camera. And that changed the course. I was in Albania. Again, it's not mentioned often. And that country was occupied in 1939 by Mussolini. It's a Muslim country, Muslim majority country, the ancestral home of one of the great women of the 20th century, Mother Teresa. Muslim majority country, Jews and Christians living there. It was invaded by Hitler's army in 1943, and they wanted the Muslims to capture Jews. The Muslims in Albania had a concept of bisa, protection, giving your word. Not one of them collaborated, and they were saved. People demonize Iran. They don't mention the Iranian Schindler, Abdul Hussein Sardari, who gave thousands of visas to Jews, and even Iranian Jews and non-Iranian Jews to help them. Coming to my father's point of Kalma Haq, I used to play cricket in the mall near the Jefferson Memorial. And I was very inspired that Jefferson had a seal called "Rebellion to Tyrants is Obedience to God." That's Thomas Jefferson saying that, the father of the Declaration of Independence. The place I used to play cricket now has become the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Museum. But I just want to mention about FDR. When it mattered, what was the stance of people when the Jews were being exterminated? That's also to be checked also. With the flow, everybody goes with the flow. Conformity is very easy. Being safe in numbers is very easy. A ship, St. Louis, German ship, full of German Jewish refugees seeking sanctuary, arrived near the port of Miami. They saw the lights. 1939. What did Mr. Roosevelt do? Scram. Most of them went back and they were incinerated. This is, ladies and gentlemen, the record of people when it matters. I have dealt and talked with many of the church leaders. And before Gaza, they used to say, I love Jesus and Jesus loves me. I've been educated in Foreman Christian College, which was set up by the United States Presbyterian Church in 1864, when Lincoln was the president. Whenever I go to my hometown, Lahore, I go to the American cemetery to pay homage to my teachers, American teachers. And the epitaph is basically of St. Paul. Very much, I'm a great admirer of St. Paul because he saw light on the road to Damascus. He was unhorsed, he was blinded, he was sent to persecute Christians, and then he saw apparition of Christ, and Christ told him, "Why do you persecute me?" And he changed. So when you go to the American cemetery in Lahore, most of the epitaph on the tombstone is written, I basically kept the faith, I stayed the course, and I fought the good fight. This ultimately, the Palestinian fight is ultimately the best possible fight. And when I see young people here, when I see the crowd, see, it's very hard to find out when you have won. You look at material terms, so many people killed, homes destroyed, but the spirit is unbroken, unconquered, unbowed. To quote the poem Invictus by W.H. Henley, who was a handicapped person, which inspired Mandela for 27 years at Robben Island. I'm bloodied but unbowed. The Palestinians, ladies and gentlemen, have already won. They have won this battle. They have won this war. This was not a war, this was a massacre. Mass murder, hiding under the terminology of a war. Again, what happened to Israel? Israel has been its own greatest enemy. You are down by your own errors and own mistakes. It has already set in motion a process of delegitimization. The harm Israelis, policy makers have done to Israel, nobody could have done to them. And for that, please look at the documentary. I don't know how many people have seen the documentary, The Gatekeepers. It was an Israeli documentary, 2012, heads of their main intelligence agency, Shin Bet, and they themselves mention what Israeli policies, how it's going to doom the Israelis. Read also what Ahmed Olmert, the Israeli prime minister, said about Israeli policy, how they're endangering it. So I really believe that what is happening is a watershed event, and you can hurt people, you can kill them, you can maim them, but as long as they don't throw in the towel, they have won. The biggest example in conclusion I'll give was just shortly after the advent of Islam, there was an attempt to wipe out the family of Holy Prophet. Imam Hussein stood up, the grandson. He did not yield to tyranny. He stood up and he said, "I'm not going to surrender." There was no chance of him of confronting the huge army led by Muslims based in Damascus. He did not surrender. And his name, thanks to his sister Zainab, I see her namesake here, she took on the leadership, she inspired people, and 14 centuries afterwards, the Holy Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said that the name Hussein will resonate through history, because resistance is not basically an option, it is an obligation. And 14 centuries later, a man took an oath in America after 9/11, I, Barack Hussein Obama, take the oath. So this is the lesson. Obama, black African father, black Muslim, and mother was Anne Stanley. His mother, by the way, served around my hometown in Lahore. And he then basically went to Indonesia. His father was, again, a Muslim, Lolo Suetro. His mother was there. And he became basically a symbol of hope at that time. So my contention is finally that Edmund Gharib is right there. 50 years ago, he gave me his book, Enemy of the Sun. Edmund, the enemy of the sun has not been able to darken the sun. The sun still shines. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Khan, for taking us on a journey, international one, and taking us out of the US and our Eurocentric Eurocentric examples, and also out of the Palestinian circle, we tend to be consumed with that too much. So you took us to Albania, you took us to the UK, you took us to Muhammad Ali, and you took us to Iran, Abdul Hussein Sardari, with really one message that the spirit of the Palestinian fight is unbroken, and do not underestimate the fight of one person. Never estimate that. And I think that's a great lesson to carry on. Well, thank you again. I would love to give you the floor, but just give me one sentence. I appreciate that. Thank you. So you've heard from 4 speakers from different perspectives, from the personal testimony to the global testimony as well, and also some statistics and information about the movement on the campuses, and also an endorsement and the call from the documentary, from the media and the broadcast, how important it is for us to capture, to support, to document in order to maintain the support, maintain the momentum of the resistance, and not really cave in, because the campaign of oppression, the campaign of suppression is great, and it's sophisticated and well organized. Nevertheless, the spirit is unbroken. So I'm not gonna pose any question to the speaker. I wanna use the entire 28 minutes remain for your brief comments, your one question per person, and also for any other observation you wanna make, but please make sure that other people have space also to share as well. And if you have a question to somebody, please, you can pose it to them or to all the panel as well. It's coming to you.
I'm Dr. Maysoon Ali. I'm a very good friend of Dr. Jamil Faiz, the grandfather of Sereen and her grandmother. I am so proud of the presentation today. Sereen, you proved to be, you are the one that your grandfather has always wanted to see. He is a man who loved Palestine. He installed that in you. Same thing with your mother. I'm very proud of you. Keep your head high, keep your achievements, and always be proud that you are a Palestinian young lady.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please. There is the lady here. Thank you.
My name is Ann Lyko, and I'm 77 and grew up during the fight about Vietnam and all the civil rights. And what strikes me is what you're talking about in Palestine. It's so much bigger. It wouldn't have been happening but for the United States supporting it, funding it, sending all the weapons, justifying it, doing all the vetoes in the UN. And somehow I don't understand how this country has so lost its way, and how we need to get all Americans to understand what you were saying about the schools. How can the people being running our education be so blind to everything that this country was supposedly set up to do, and we've destroyed. And listening to all of you, I was kind of sort of thinking, we've gone really wrong in the last 30 years. I mean, we've done a lot of horrible things from the beginning, but how do we change what used to be one of the most powerful countries and most inspiring countries in the world, and make it such a cesspool where it is harming and not recognizing people who are fighting for the same things that we said this country was made of, you know?
Thank you.
And I'm just very frustrated, because I felt like we fought a lot of these battles before and we're still fighting them going backwards.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take some more. We'll take a couple of more questions or comments. Okay, so Nora, you heard the question? Yes. Yes, please. So we'll take the question. Can you please give oh, already? Ian, let's take.
See, you made it very clear how the administrations of universities use this dense thicket of post hoc rules, quote unquote, to suppress. What can students, or what should students do about these rules? Should they try to abide by them? Should they try to change them through university policies? Should they, or should they just defy them? What is your view on tactics?
Thank you. Good. So let's take those two and then we'll come back to you. Yes. Sereen, I think you want to take the first one or the second one, whatever.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for what you said. And then I guess about your question, like I said, I think rules are meant to restrain, not to keep things in order. And I think that change has never come from people specifically following the rules and, following the status quo, and people can take with that what they will. But I'm not responsible for anything that happens. But I think that when we see rules and we see things that come across as repressive, because they are repressive, I think students and actually everyone within these institutions has an obligation to say something about them. I think just seeing, for example, if you see a rule or a policy that may seem a little repressive and just standing by, I think that in itself is a form of complicity. There's different ways people can resist. A lot of people just need to assess their risk and their privilege. So it's not to say everyone should go out and, do things that may get your degree withheld, which apparently doesn't take a lot besides chalking. But it's to say that everyone should assess their own risk. And it's to say that I think rules in general, I think it's a very funny word to me. Rules in general, I think, are created to maintain the status quo. And when it comes to my university, the policies they implemented were to, in their words, maintain aesthetic. That's what they said. And they actually had said, these new policies that are implemented have nothing to do with the protest. They have nothing to do with whatever it may be. But yet they implemented one that was prohibition of encampments. They implemented one that was banning sidewalk chalk when the SJPs used to do it every single Wednesday. And so I think that when students see these kind of policies, we have a responsibility to do something about them. And whether that be working from the bottom up and going to something that may seem simple, but like the Student Government Association, every single university has one, bringing that to them. And that's how we should look at all these different systems, is building the power up. I don't think we should necessarily rely on our administrators to start immediately changing things, because there's really clear how people can value profit over people. So
thank you. Mr. Khan, you had this question and also the question from the lady, if you want to comment on it. How can we take back?
I think one of the major problems I've seen, there are now about 10 million Muslims. But where's the beef? That's the question I asked them. Because their parents, and I've seen it very closely, many of them, mostly of them, have come for economic reasons. And the cautiousness in them infects their children. And the children may be extremely well educated, but the mindset remains timid. I think education has been overrated. One can be extremely well educated, and yet one can lack confidence. And that has to, unless you expose yourself, like Sereen has done it, unless you expose yourself, go through hardship, not be too much addicted to being mollycoddled, only then you grow. And by trying to helicopter them too much, you have made them timid. And they somehow are very tentative. And that is one of the reasons why, of all the communities, of immigrant communities in the world, the Muslim community in America, despite being 10 million strong, is the most underachieving. And mindset is the issue here, basically.
Thank you. Thank you. Nora, do you have any comment on those two questions?
Yeah, I mean, quickly, and I've discussed this a lot with people of my parents' generation as well, who have that kind of same, you know, just like rage and grief. You know, we were in the streets, we marched for civil rights, we marched against the war, we thought we had changed things, and I believe that those gains were wholly incomplete. That it didn't address, you know, they didn't address really the root issue, which is capitalism and imperialism, and you know the you know the issue of Palestine was completely ignored. You know, up until really, I mean, in mainstream circles, up until Israel launched a genocide that could not be, you know, unseen. And I think that especially when it has come to places of higher education, where, as Sereen was saying, you know, diversity is like it's something for their brochures. It's not really a value that they espouse or that they even think is valuable. I think that kind of highlights how incomplete these civil rights struggles have been, and how far we still need to go.
Thank you. Just as a comment or response to you also, Ian, and I'm sure you are, as like myself, have many students ask you, should I break the law or the regulations of the, and I have those every Wednesday between 12 and 2, my ops hours. You know, should I protest? Should I talk on the side? Should I go to the demonstration? I have 3 things usually I tell the student. The first thing is that we clarify the risk. Student and anyone who's going to go to a protest and break this policy should understand very clearly the risk that they're taking and the range and the possibility as much as possible. The second one is really to have some clarity on the technique they're going to use and why they're using it, to articulate the rationale. You don't want people to break without necessarily understanding why they're doing that. And we have many students who might be able to want to do that. The third one, which I found the most important in my view, is securing a circle of support for any student who go and challenge this policy, because we've had students who done that and did not find enough support from the community and from the advocacy group and even from their parents or from their friends or their colleagues once they took the risk. And I found that going through those 3 items give clarity to the student and to whether their organization or individual, and they will be more informed about their decision what to make. I will never say, yes, you have to do that. That's not my job, not as a professor and not as an individual or even activist. I think the person has to be able to do that. But one more thing we've been saying recently on this, the head of the suppression in the universities are the administrators. And we lack much of the strategic approaches in how do we challenge those administrators, especially board members who have money, influence, and have investment economic in the university and also outside. That area have not been as fully explored beyond the protest and beyond the naming and shaming. You want to comment?
Clever answer to my question.
Oh?
These rules evolve from all different parts of the university. So if you, as a faculty member or a student, go to the and say, I want to know the rules.
Yes.
I want to know all the rules so that I can have a demonstration legally. And you collect all the rules and you get can you sign this? Can you say that this is all the rules? And if I follow these, that's valuable for a couple of reasons. One, I don't believe they'll ever sign it. Two, it will be so ridiculous that it can be a great political tool to say the university is saying it's a place of action. And these are the rules for speaking.
Yes, thank you.
It's just a simple legal thing to do that a student or a faculty member can, that would be very, I think, very useful.
Yeah, just quick example on the irony of those rules. When Trump put the police in Washington, 7 or 8 universities in this city allowed the protest, allowed the use of megaphone, allowed the disruption of the classes, allowed to violate every rule that they put against the student when they did solidarity against Palestine. In fact, they got encouraged by the administration to go and protest in town. So that's sort of the dysfunctionality of that. Yes. Sorry.
Thank you, man.
You'll go after him.
Yeah, I just want to thank my young comrade, Sereen, who probably gave one of the most compelling and moving speeches I've heard in a long time. But not only that, it was very clear and it told the story of exactly what has happened. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have a comment also on what Nora said, in terms
Please.
of protests and its impact. I've gone to the State Department to ask questions for a long, long time, for decades. And I remember right before the war in Iraq, we had 1 million people out there protesting.
Yeah.
1 million people. And I asked a question, and they said, we don't run foreign policy or security policy by protest. And they continue to say that. I mean, I remember year after year, last year, they said the same thing. So the truth is, they're not moved, by the protest. That's not, I'm not saying that they should all go home. No, quite the contrary. We need, louder protests, actually, much louder and more impacted. But it behooves us to remember that the Vietnam War, the height of the protest was in 68 and 69. The war went on for another 6-7 years.
Yes.
So remember that. What you need to do is be creative. Look at, some of the things that Ian just talked about.
Mhm.
And finally, I have a very quick question that I really wanted to pose to Ian earlier in the day about the shift. Everybody talks about shift and so on. In academia, I mean, this
Yes.
repressive thing, are we seeing, perhaps, is it going to be less, more? Is it regressing, and so on? Thank you, Mohammed. That's actually
Thank you.
to you the question.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take another response from you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julia. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Professor, for your questions and for what you offered. My question is loosely defined for Sereen. Thank you for your really inspiring words. I hope a lot of people watch that online as well. I'm wondering, with your experience, both when you were organizing on campus or perhaps in this transition out of school, if you have any reflections, asks for people who are in the community organizing space, grassroots activists outside of the campus, and where we could build greater linkages with student movements, or if you see student leadership transferring into community movements, because I feel like these two things kind of exist in parallel, but that gap for connection, I think, is really desperate. And as someone who's been out of school for a few years, just seeing I am part of the youth movement, but I'm not on campus anymore. And how do we kind of make those connections? So I know you've had your own personal story and journey that you've been fighting the past few months, but if you've been making that transition and can offer insight, it would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So maybe we can go to Nora. Do you have any comment, and I'll come to you.
I would love to hear Sereen's response. But I mean, I think there's a lot of momentum right now, even though, the protests have somewhat died down. The encampments have been, banned essentially across campuses. I think that students aren't giving up, and they're not, going back to kind of business as usual. And I think a lot of students, I wrote a book that came out 11 years ago about Students for Justice in Palestine and affiliated chapters around the country. And they were up against an incredible amount of repression that really wasn't being even, mentioned by larger, political movements or in the media or anything. It was like this very kind of ignored section of the, the kind of modern civil rights movement. And the repression hasn't gone away. It's escalated in various ways. But I think students have done this incredible thing over the last, 15, 20 years, where they have really normalized Palestine solidarity on campuses. And they have moved Palestine-centered organizing from the margins into the mainstream. So now we see these coalitions on campuses where there are 60, 70, 80, 100 different student groups all backing a divestment resolution or the protection of students' rights to hold an encampment protest or to invite speakers who can speak openly about what's happening in Palestine and the university's ties. And I think students now, I'm seeing some of the students that I interviewed for that book so long ago who are now in positions of power. Zohran Mamdani, right, he was a leader of SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine at Bowdoin College. And now he's in this, very vaunted, very visible public position. And, it doesn't mean that that people shouldn't make sure that he's being held accountable, because, we've seen way too often what happens when, leftists or progressives who are really good on Palestine get elevated to a certain public position. Sometimes they conveniently let their Palestine solidarity go. But it is remarkable that now we're seeing, students who were fighting repression and who were making the links between different struggles and connecting with different student movements and understanding, deepening their understanding and analysis of class and colonialism, who are now in positions of serious leadership. I think that's something that's really aggravating, the ruling class. And I have hope in the students. It's very hard to hold on to hope in these very, very bleak and dark times. But I have hope that, Sereen's generation is going to do incredible things. And we just have to figure out ways to keep supporting them.
Thank you, Nora. Yes, Sereen.
Yeah, that was a great answer. I think I'm trying to kind of combine a couple questions all at once. If I can make sense of my messy notes. I will say, thank you for your question. I think that also ties into the question that you asked, ma'am, that has to do about what happened, where did we get the train off the track? So something I just want to quickly say that's going to lead into the answer to yours, is that I don't think it was really ever on the correct track to begin with. I think that this country started with colonialism and it's actually built on stolen land. So we can't put our trust into these systems where they actually the foundation of this country has to do with colonialism and occupation. Yeah. So, and I think tying into someone else just said, I forget who, but actually, Nora, you just said it. Zionism is so deeply rooted within imperialism that it's we just can't rely on the systems above us to bring us what we want. So that's why we need to answer your question, build the power from down up. This is what has to do with grassroots movements. And then when I think about this, I think about the signs that I sometimes see at those 50-51 protests that say if Kamala was elected, I'd be at brunch right now because it's on a Sunday. I think that in itself is the biggest form of just liberals that are really comfortable, because the reason they're saying they'd be at brunch is because their rights aren't the ones that are being at risk right now. And that's why so many people are just now speaking up and are just now angry, because there's these people that are saying, oh, now my rights are being threatened. We were never comfortable. There was never a comfortable point. It was just only certain people could say they were comfortable. And so the answer to that, in my opinion, is building it from down up. And there's so many different ways. You do not have to be a student to be getting heavily involved. And again, like everyone has different capacities. You know, people work all the time. Maybe they can only like show up to a couple campaigns or something like that, or even read the news. That in itself is making sure that you are staying involved because you're educating yourself. And that should not be overlooked. I think education is the biggest tool right now because my grandma always quotes this, but Trump one time in a speech said, the smart people don't like me, which means the dumb people do. So it's like literally ignorance. It's the people that decide that it's too much to deal with and they don't want to try to educate themselves because it's just going to be too much. So education itself is the biggest tool right now. Knowledge is the biggest tool, even though that's like really overly said. It's true. And so in my opinion, kind of the answer to that is, yes, maybe there's not as many protests like you pointed out, Ammo, and that I don't think that just because there's no protests, it means that the movement's dying down. I think that we need to look at it in a way where the protests and the encampments were a strategy in this larger movement, and there will be other strategies. Right now, there's a bunch of different campaigns that are going on. Maersk, which is one of the biggest shipping companies that ships weapons to Israel, there's a campaign going on through PYM to stop shipping through Maersk. And I had gone to Norfolk, which is one of the beginning ports, and instead of, you know, yelling at the people that are doing their work and these like labor workers that are the ones hauling the boxes onto these ships, we shouldn't be doing that because they're just doing their jobs. So the way that we organize from the bottom up is we go and we educate these workers and say, hey, do you know what you're doing right now? You educate them. This is what's going on. This is who it's affecting. And then maybe that's how you start to build up a union. You build up a general strike. And we saw Italy do it, you know, and we saw all these different countries, and these things are possible. And so we need to think big. When people think of a large question like a general strike or what it means, even for that to exist, and then they just are like, well, that's too big, we shouldn't touch it. That's why we may be stagnant. So we need to build from the bottom up. So wherever you do, I don't know, what do you do? You said you're not a student.
I was involved with that. My story is kind of random, so I don't.
Mhm.
I'm back and I'm trying to plug it in.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I am very much on this question of like, I think we have a lot of political education and not a lot of organizing.
Yeah.
Going. What is that education of like how to get young people like me?
Mhm.
This is how you spend
Right.
most of the time about it. To strategize about like, you know, you have Black Panther Party, like there are
Mhm.
people who are doing social welfare programs in history.
Yeah.
How is our generation going to start bringing in?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think that those spaces need to be created more. There's a lot of discourse and a lot of talk and not so much action. And there's the time for talking and there's the time for action. And I think that people need to start acting, but it needs to be with strategy. And so that's why I'm also trying to say that just because the protests may have died down doesn't mean there's not people in the background doing strategy work. I know PYM does a lot of strategy work. There's all these different organizations like Hoping, for example, that do some strategy work as well. And so honestly, I think there can never be enough of those spaces. So the answer honestly is those need to be created more. And I don't think anyone should overlook their own responsibility in that and say that they can't do something. So wherever you are, wherever your community is, even talking to people around you and saying, how can we implement this? Creating a campaign, creating things that people care about. Like there's not enough healthcare, guess where that money's going? You know, creating that kind of campaign, getting people to care. And you mentioned like, how do we get the power? We need to build that. Again, I keep saying this, but bottom up. So I think we need to work with those around us to be able to take away the power from the higher systems because we can't rely on the systems that, again, the foundations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. In response to this, I'll mention a couple of things. It's okay to decline. It's okay to take a break. فرصة محارب, as we say in Arabic. So it's okay to be in that mode. And because you said yourself, it is a long term. You have to have a long term vision for it. But I think where the reorganizing right now is, beside the thing that Sereen mentioned, outside the campuses, right now, the debate whether to what extent campus resistance group will be able to challenge and take the BDS as a cause and challenge their own institution, because every university in this country have investment in different scales. And challenging that is one of the main causes that has been debated, whether this will become the core strategy of many on-campus part. Another one is really the capacity to maintain working within a coalition of wider than the Middle East, wider than the cause of Palestine, to work with other causes and be part of that coalition. The more the movement on campuses manages to create those relationships, the more sustainability it will have and the more wider base it will be able to build. Those are two major challenges that I think we might see in the next, hopefully, in the next strategizing session that they will have. Will you allow me to say that Julia was last year in my class, and she's one of the people who picked up her bag and went down to Washington, joined the Pink group, Code Pink, and got arrested in her first, detained in her first attempt in the Congress. So there are many people who committed themselves, they committed their life to those actions. And I think that's the type of support we could continue, particularly people with the gray hair, as our speaker said, continue to support and give hadani or an environment for the young activists as well. I know we'll have last input from the gentleman here. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Anan, tfaddal. That will be the last comment.
Want a little bit more focus on strategy. We've been touching on the need for strategy. And I think that the campus movement accomplished a great deal. And maybe in terms of protesting, and maybe the need is not for active protesting now in the next phase of the movement. And I wanted to see if you could comment on from where the strategies should be deriving. Because I think it was mentioned by one of the panelists, the need to organize the campus action in a certain way. I think that organizing it could open it to more scrutiny and direct targeting in this environment. And so further organizing needs to be done with care. Therefore, and I think a couple of things that have been mentioned here is Black Panthers and Fred Hampton. I think that we need to, while those are informative concepts to think about, we need to be very careful when we're strategizing and take the right lessons for our students. So the question is, how should the strategy be derived?
Thank you. That's a big question for the last minute of the conversation. But I'd like to honor your response to say protest is not enough and should be strategic, a critique that has been made many times regarding many social and protest movement. But I'm sure there are plenty of lessons can be learned from many protest movement around the world, not only in the West, but also in the global South. And there are many of those colleague activists and others who are, I think, struggling right now in terms of responding to the current situation with a strategy that is more effective. I mentioned a couple of items that have been put on the agenda on the DMV area for the Student for Justice for Palestine and JVP and other groups here in terms of how they would like to focus their nonviolent action. Gene Sharp and others have put at least 300 ways of nonviolent resistance. There is a plenty of technique to nonviolent resist. What's usually missing is the support from the leadership and support from the bottom up. And I think that's where the direction will be. Maybe I'll give 30 seconds to close this panel.
I think the very fact, basically, we are here speaking itself shows the importance of saying no, of not succumbing to cruelty, of standing up. And the point the gentleman made, that organization, all that, sometimes even speaking up in front of an audience and speaking truth itself has an inspiring message. It gives courage. Courage is very contagious, and also cowardice is very contagious also. So it's important sometimes to send a message of courage, which has been given this afternoon by the Jerusalem Fund. hats off to it and hats off to the participants and attendees. Thank you.
Sereen?
I think when we're talking, also just to kind of close off, but mentioning your question, when we're talking about strategy, I think it is important to look in the past, but I also think it's important to get it from the right sources, because there are many people and many strategies that were done in the past that a lot of people may look at as violent or unnecessary. And there's a lot of people, you know, that may have deemed certain people terrorists, and, you know, it really just depends on the way that you look at it. And so, you know, Nelson Mandela, for example, was deemed a terrorist. And so I think when we're trying to talk about like how we should learn from people, I think we need to learn from the right people and learn from the right, you know, outlooks on life. I think there's many different strategies. I think that sometimes it's a little bit of a, you know, we're talking about nonviolent protest. I think that sometimes that word to me kind of hits the wrong spot, because I feel like when the encampments were going on, a lot of the justification, the people were like, well, the police tore down and it was a nonviolent protest. And fact of the matter is, I think it shouldn't have been torn down regardless. I mean, these were people that were standing up for human rights. You know, was it to say that it was peaceful or not peaceful? I don't think that should be necessarily in the question, because fact of the matter is, you look at it on the outlook, these were people that were standing up for human rights and demanding divesting from death. And that's not a lot to ask for. Anyways, so I think there's a lot of strategies. I think we can look back and like into history. We can look back on, again, we need to be careful where we look back on. I know like the ICJ and the UN, for example, have just now like deemed it a genocide within the past year, but we don't need their validation to understand that. I mean, we've known this for a really long time. I think we can look at strategies in many different ways, and also look back in the past and our ancestors, and again, where we get our sources. I know like there's many UN resolutions that are referenced when we talk about struggle, we talk about resistance, whatever it may be. I know there's resolution like 3473 and also 2645 that talk about what it means to resist and who has the right to resist. So I just want to also leave people with that in general. I think we should think about what it means to struggle and what it means to resist and who is, you know, allowed to. Again, so look back on the past, learn from it, but also be careful where you get your sources from. Nelson Mandela is now looked at one of the, you know, best freedom fighters, and yet he was deemed a terrorist at one point. And so I hope that we all leave this room with some sort of knowledge, but that we don't just sit with it, but that we also do something about it. I think that's one of the worst things we can do, is just stay stagnant. So I really thank you all for being here. Again, thank the Jerusalem Fund in general. Thank the Jerusalem Fund in general. You guys, thank you for creating this space. I think this is very necessary at a time like this for dialogue, but also action as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I echo everything
Yes, Nora, go ahead.
both my panelists said, but I just want to say also, it's so important now. I mean, part of the strategy is grounding yourself and sharpening your political principles, and you know, the fundamentals of continuing to struggle, you know, shoulder to shoulder with Palestinians for their liberation is a commitment, an unwavering commitment to defeat Zionism and to proudly state that you are an anti-Zionist. And you know, this is an ideology that has never had a place in this world, and certainly has never had a place in Palestine. It should have never been carried out. And once we can effectively articulate what Zionism is and how it must be defeated as an ideology and as a state project, then that is a really good starting place to develop our strategies, whatever they may be.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for your patience. I think we're now for the closing remark. Thank you again, and thank you for the panelists.
Thank you.
Well, I could keep saying thank you all day for all that you guys did. But I do want to make a few things in particular. Moderators and speakers, amazing, simply amazing. I want to say a few words about Sereen. First time I see her as an adult, but and was being said about her, but I want to talk about Jamil, her grandfather. Jamil was a brilliant academic and physician. He retired early and came to Washington with all kinds of determination and energy to change the political scene in Washington. He was a little bit frustrated because Washington is unyielding, but I see that you may be able to accomplish his dream, you and your generation. One more thing about Anan, he asked a question. What you didn't know is that his son Ammar is the one who made the headlines at University of Austin. Ammar gave his deposition. His activism led to the president of UT in being run out. He came to Dallas, unfortunately. Right. I want to thank the staff, Duna, Tariq, and the interns. Wonderful, beautiful interns. Great job. Yeah. And a special thank, I don't want to forget, to Mohammed. He's hiding behind that door. Mohammed was our executive director here a few years ago, and he has a tremendous genius for electronics and wires and monitors and all that. Yeah, he makes things happen. So he came all the way from Dallas to make sure we don't have any snafus with our technology. Thank you, Mohammed. So Sarah mentioned earlier that this place runs on donations. So since I'm the treasurer, I'll be standing at the door waiting. All right. So I have a special request of you. Please share the proceedings of this conference with all you know. It is on C-SPAN. You can get the first 2 sessions off C-SPAN website, but the entire conference will be posted on the Jerusalem Fund website. If you bring it to other people's attentions, it will be eye-opener for a lot of people who need their eyes opened. So if you're not connected with the Jerusalem Fund, please give us your email address or physical address. We want to stay in touch with you. And I hope that next year the title of the conference, and you're all invited, will be, How was Palestine liberated in 1 year? Let's be optimistic. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for staying for the afternoon. I hope to see you at future events.
To see you, Sereen. It's like for your work.